Hello. I am a collector of things from Fordham, New York. I used to live there. I still visit there on occasion. And over the years, I've gotten a few pieces. To start out, this is a musket ball from the Battle Hill site. I got this from someone who metal detected there years ago. I find it very interesting, and I'm sure if it could talk, it would have a lot of things to talk about and say. Anyways, I hope you enjoy the rest of my collection. Thank you. This is a pharmacist or apothecary card from T.Z. Gibbs, who was, well, obviously based in Fordham, New York. It's dated 1875, and as you can tell, it's sort of an alchemist kind of feel to it. Uh, in those days, you could pretty much buy anything you wanted at the local store, I guess, in ways of pain killing, good, or, otherwise you just suffered. Anyways, this is a card from his shop. These are photographs taken by A.H. Fell, a photographer and an undertaker in Fordham, New York. It was very common in those days for the two jobs to be one and the same because very often you only had your picture taken when you were born and when you died. Um, these all either have Fisher or Harvey on the back of them. Here are a few more, obviously of the same family. And if you notice, they're all dressed nice and neat, and because it was a really big deal back in the 1800s to have your picture taken. It wasn't like today when it's just an everyday common thing. If you notice, the one on the right is different. That's because it's a memorial card. She had probably passed away, and this was their way of her family remembering her. They must have had some money because they've had a lot of pictures taken of themselves. And it wasn't really a common thing, like I said, back in the 18 and early 1900s for that to happen. This is Ann Street looking west. Obviously, it's a postcard. I grew up on Ann Street, and I don't remember it ever looking like that. So, we're probably talking about the 1920s, maybe at most. And again, dirt roads. That's how it was back then. This is George Street looking south. Some of those houses still might be there. I'm not really sure. But Fordham hasn't changed a whole lot over the years. But in some ways, it's changed dramatically. And I'll show you why in a few more postcards. This is a 1910 postcard of the locks in Fordham. If you look on that right to the right, it says 10 Nights in a Barroom. It was a very popular prohibition play put on by people trying to stop drinking. So, again, Fordham was still involved in things like that. It's been a lot of years since those canals were open or even not covered in dirt. This is a postcard dated 1907, a bird's eye view of Fordham, New York. It is published by Weiniger, and he owned the antique shop, which was at that time a general store. And the interesting thing about him was he was blind. He literally had his horses trained to drive around town to do his business, as they would say back in the day, and drive back home again without help from anyone. And I find that kind of amazing. This is Albert Fell, the gentleman who took those pictures. kind of looks like an undertaker, I guess. Anyways, he actually was around for quite a while, and he moved various places, but I guess his legacy will always be sealed in Fort Anne for all his pictures and his other things that he accomplished while he was there. And I believe, but I don't know for sure, that what they call the beehive used to be his, well, place of business, so to speak. This is a postcard of the old school that was in the middle of the park somewhere before it got tore down to make way for the new school back in the 1930s. In all honesty, I don't know a whole lot more about it, but just think, in the middle of the park, there used to be a school and a church that burned down, oddly enough. So there's been a lot of changes to Fort Anne over the years. We just don't see them. This is a postcard of the main street in Fort Anne, New York. If you look, you can see the antique shop slash Weinberg's shop. What was Crumley's, I guess, is still Crumley's. The town hall, and maybe some buildings that aren't there anymore. This is obviously from Fort Anne, New York. On July 27th, 1911, a fire ripped through Fort Anne, burning down basically parts of the middle of Fort Anne, which was called the business district. The loss estimated was 30,000 at the time. Where Coleman Farms was actually a hotel, and there are lots of little businesses and all sorts of things. All that was gone. Literally gone. And the town had no actual fire department at the time. They got one shortly afterwards. And just look at that. I mean, they were decimated. Completely burned down, some of these areas were. And they had to start all over again from scratch. Okay, this is a certificate for Albert H. Fell in 1935 to sell insurance. And I'm not sure how long he lived, but I don't know. It just seems like maybe it might have been his son or somebody else, because he had to be fairly old when he started this. But I guess if it was him, back in those days, you did everything. And he started selling insurance. I got this at a yard sale when I was like 16. I think it was taken at the old school, obviously, before it got tore down. There are names on back like Leanne Collins, Hazel Fogg, Ruth Granger, and a lot of names, if you grew up in Fort Anne, you'd recognize probably. I don't know, it just amazes me. They look so prim and proper. And I can just imagine, it must have been something back then. One Battle of Fort Anne ashtray. Not sure where I got it, don't really smoke, but, it makes an interesting little addition to my collection. If you grew up in Fort Anne in the 70s and 80s, you probably remember these banks. My brother, Dan, probably helped make some of these banks. They're handmade out of wood, and, a little silly and hokey, but a little slice of hometown America, I guess. This is a postcard of the Upper Locks in Fort Anne, New York. If you look, you can see people in carriages. And this was dated 1913 and sold by Weiniger, probably at his store. And all the history and all the things that happened, it just seems pretty amazing to me. This is a receipt for taxes from my father for a house he had back in 1959, apparently, somewhere in Canes Falls. The assessed value was 500 for, and the consolidated tax rate was 4160 for a total of $20.80 in taxes. And I'm sure he complained about it all the time about taxes being too high. Let's face it, we wish they were that low today. This is an advertisement looking for things for the Fordham Museum, which used to be housed at the Portage, which became something else. And I can't remember what it is now. I'm sorry. It's just, there's too many names. But anyways, the stuff that was in the museum eventually disappeared. And it's probably somewhere in Albany right now. But this is like a whole list of things like lamps and fiddles and all sorts of stuff that people donated for the Fordham Museum. An autograph book, and of course a Fordham, New York Fire Department glass. I'm sure I had a few glasses of beer out of that, somebody did. The interesting thing about the autograph book to me is that it's actually signed by Mr. Call, as in David Call, and if you went to school in the 1980s, you knew who he was. Anyways, little pieces of history of Fordham that have traveled throughout the years and somehow end up in my collection. A envelope commemorating in 1977 the Battle of Fordham. You can take your, I don't know, theories, I guess. I don't know who exactly won. All I know is at some point shots were fired, people left, and then they set the fort on fire. There you go. One dance card from the junior prom in 1954. Don't know exactly what music was played. I can imagine some sort of big band stuff probably. But I do find it interesting they actually had dance cards then. A 1905 Weiniger, that's how you pronounce his name, I guess. Weiniger produced postcard of the battle curve of Fordham. Just think, back then a train coming into town was probably the biggest deal in the world to everybody. Especially kids who like to holler at it. And maybe throw rocks, I don't know. One postcard of the Fordham Museum with children, I suppose, appearing and going and seeing what's inside. If you look over, you can see the cannon that now sits in the park. Just, I don't know, all the memories that are in Fordham, you don't really think about them, but they were made there. And finally, one 1907 lower lock picture of Fordham, New York. And I like this one just because of the color. I mean, you don't think of 1907 in color photographs. When you do, they're usually a little blurry and filled in, but this is a really nice photograph for a day. If you like my video, please, I don't know, favorite it, I guess, or give me a thumbs up or something. I know it's a little rough, but I'm still getting used to doing this. And I'm working with some equipment that is slightly out of date, but it works. So I would appreciate if you could like it perhaps. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed the video.